So that gives you just a little bit of a snippet, a taste of some of that journey. And if I had the technology, I'd set it up. The snippet I wanted to play was on Māori television on Sunday night, the lead item on their news, where Thursday and Friday last week, Wesley hosted and I co-facilitated a wānanga with the Notorious chapter, which was for them about leadership. It was a wānanga about leadership, and their president, Roy Dunn, and began the wānanga by sort of saying, this is the history of our community and where we come from, and this is what we did in the past, and this is the sort of leadership that we had in the past. But this is the vision about where we're heading, where I see ourselves going. So the question is, what sort of leadership do we need as a community to take us there? Because the leadership model we had in the past is not the leadership model that's going to take us to the future. And that laid the groundwork for some really creative discussions amongst the members in a way that usually when they go to national conferences they don't discuss. They just, most of them sit there passively and just nod and go, yep, yep, agree with the certain. But we had Ani Waka talked about the story of Māori television. We had Judge Joe Williams talking about his experience growing up around the mob in Hastings, whose brother was a senior patch member of the Mungal mob and died last year. He says, I've seen that lifestyle impact. So when we're talking about hard to reach, that's the sort of reflection I want to explore in this sort of brief forum and discussion on that. And I want to... oopsie. Sorry. I want to play around and explore, unpack what's some of the thinking that what facilitates what I've experienced is very creative exchange of knowledge and people getting to the point of being self-motivated to want to do good and do well. Because to me, that's the critical factor. We can play around with sanctions and levers and things like that, but the ideal way is we all want to do good in some way. So how? And I picked that up also in in Leslie's thing. So I just want to offer some thoughts. When I said yes, I said we need to, and here's some things, some of my sort of jargony speak, that we need to understand the welfare system as a human system, and it's all interconnected. Working with, I'll call them gangs just for short, although I don't like that, the interface between the justice system and the welfare system is profound. So we need to understand that. And I want to say a little bit more about linear and complexity. And I want to acknowledge that my experience is that many people and many groups have part of the solution. And probably there's whole groups of people that aren't at this conference that actually have part of the solution. We need to be able to understand about how to sit around the table and enable people to contribute. And that's issues around basic respect and that. So very simply, my experience of 12 years in government policy was largely shaped by this world. It was a linear world, and it assumed people and systems were more like machines. And it was binary. Things were good or bad. Things were reductionist. So if we were dealing with issues, be it youth suicide, unemployment, welfare systems, we tried to reduce things down to little wee bite-sized bits. In doing that, we broke things up, we fragmented them, we analysed the little wee bits of them, we produced big charts, we had all that detail. We saw it largely as mechanical. We focused on the tangible things, and we actually thought, we kidded ourselves that everything, if we did this well enough, was predictable. So it gave rise to very simply this sort of system, where we create systems that first of all identify and in the process label people. We assess, we screen them, and then we give them the help that we think the assessment says they need. In the past, we did that with charities like that I've come out of in terms of the Methodist Church, faith-based, but later we do it more with payments, programs and experts. This approach, I would suggest, is predominantly European, mechanical in orientation, solves problems by breaking things down into little bits, is linear and is dualistic, good and bad. Now, I'm suggesting that that's not totally all bad, but I'm saying that's the dominant way we actually view issues around welfare and therefore hard-to-reach communities. If we were to dip into the insights coming out of what one you could call non-linear or complexity theory in that, these aspects in that worldview are important. There's multivariable, they're interdependent, things are fluid, dynamic. We need a process of synthesis, which is weaving things together as opposed to breaking them apart. We need to understand things as organic, and we need to understand that the world is highly relational. I would suggest there's a strong correlation between what we would call tikanga or a Māori perspective that seems to have more embedded a worldview that supports with what I'm suggesting is called non-linear. So how does that relate to welfare and working with hard-to-reach families? Rules don't always apply. Prediction is problematic, and small and simple changes can have significant impacts. Rules don't always apply. My limited experience, and others in the room may know more, and I want to acknowledge Laurie and the work that you do with CART Trust here in Wellington with these communities, that government's policy people and then that can make rules or set policies. They can then pass them down to their people and work and income and all that sort of stuff, and they've got their rule book of rules. But then they change, and then people work the rules. And I always find it fascinating when I was in government, when the difference between what happened between decisions made at the cabinet table and then how they were actually enacted on the ground. And so there's a lot of discretion exercised at each stage of the process. My experience is prediction is highly problematic, because we've had people come into our care as our agency who've basically been told by the government agency there's no hope for these people. And as soon as we say that of people, we've just done them a massive disservice. And as Leslie's illustrated with Hippie, there can be some profound turnarounds from a mother who is on the board of trustees of a local school. I'm sure if we'd used the mechanical model, people would have predicted her to have stayed in not a very positive place. And I've observed some of the most simple and smallest changes can actually trigger profound systems change. And if we stick to a mechanical model, we miss that and we lose it. And it's profoundly expensive. If you're interested, that's the Stacey matrix. I find it helpful, that way of trying to understand complexity. Along the bottom axis is around certainty. And take, for example, like sending a spaceship to the moon. There's a high degree of uncertainty, but there's clear agreement about the process. So that becomes a very technically complicated exercise. Conversely, if you took an issue that was, say, like parenting, where there's a range of there's not common agreement, and yet there's certainty about what's required, you get a socially complex, or in this area up here. What I find government tends to do, because it takes all this social complexity and it says we've got to draw it into a tender document and a contract. So we sort of take a recipe approach, and that's like baking a cake. You want to make a chocolate cake, you get a cup of this, a cup of that, you put it in here for 20 minutes and hey presto, you've got a cake. Well, human systems aren't like that. You're dealing with complex. So whenever we try and turn a human system into a recipe, you've actually done a mismatch and all that. And I would suggest that areas around welfare system and that is in this zone of complexity. I've worked through part of 3 task forces within government to simplify the welfare system. And ministers always say, we want a common benefit, we want a universal benefit. The officials go away and do work, and there's this variation and this, and it becomes very technical. And so that's just a reality.